So today, as Dixita was just saying, we're just going to go over Appsumer, have a little bit of a technical slant to it, but nothing too in depth. So what I want to do is start off by giving a bit of context, talk about the life of a performance marketer and the problems that they face, or number one problem, which is they spend a lot of money. So can you imagine if you spend $100,000 plus on your marketing budget, but you don't know what's happening in terms of the performance of your spend, how well your ads are performing, what's the ROI looking like, what's the install rates like, and having to wait, spending all that money and waiting 5+ days before knowing how well your campaigns have been performing. And it sounds crazy, but that is actually the real world for the majority of brands out there. They spend a lot of money and across a lot of platforms, and they don't actually know in totality the full picture of how well their campaigns are performing. So the reason for this is that there's still a lot of manual practices within the industry, which means logging into multiple platforms, downloading reports, putting those reports actually into Excel. Excel has its own limitations in terms of number of rows it can handle, looking at internal metrics, combining them all together. So this is a manual process for the majority of performance marketers in reality. And it obviously creates problems, suboptimal spending, has impacts on campaign performance. You can't optimize if you don't know what's happening. Obviously, you're spending money where potentially you shouldn't be spending money, but you don't know that for quite a few days. And obviously, ultimately, that impacts your revenue. So it's quite a wasteful industry in that respect. I mean, that's the background to Appsumer, to be honest with you. So that's the problem area that we're trying to deal with at Appsumer. A little bit about me. Obviously, my name is Moin Maniar. I've been engineering since 1997. Been leading tech teams since 2006. I've been at C-level since 2011. I've worked in the advertising industry, building, planning, buying, and reporting tools since 2002. So for quite a long while, it seems to be an industry I enjoy. I would say that, and I kind of fell into. So I know quite a lot, generally speaking, about the industry as a whole, both online, offline, obviously for the last several years working in the mobile space. So that's just a tiny little bit about me, not overly interesting. However, the goals of today's presentation and what we're hoping to cover, and I hope that you'll be able to take away from today, is you'll learn a little bit about Appsumer, learn a little bit about the name, a little bit about the background, how we started, how we got together, understand the why. You kind of had a snapshot there, view of why we're about, but understanding the how, learn a little bit about our technology, my background in terms of my experience with Rackspace, AWS, which is our cloud platform, and just a little bit about our tech radar, how we as a team kind of move forward. We'll talk a little bit about how data comes into the system and looking at that workflow. We'll talk about tagging, which is our USP stroke, just to say USP. You learn why you should never give a live demo, because I'm going to give a live demo, and I hope, I'm not sure how many of you are junior or not, but live demos do tend to go wrong. So I'll give you a good demonstration of why you shouldn't do that. Learn about how we've been doing since we've been around. Learn a little bit about how Appsumer fits into the InMobi ecosystem. For those of you who've been to the town hall by Abbe, you'll already have a good view of that. And learn a little bit about our roadmap. So there's hopefully a few takeaways which each of you may benefit from and learn a little bit more about us. So let's learn a little bit about our name. If we say app plus consumer, any ideas? Does anyone want to shout out what that might give you?
Appsumer.
Oh, amazing. You get a star. It's Appsumer with one M. So there's there's a few people here who have been reaching out to me, asking me to tell them more about Appsummer. It's not Appsummer. So there's no two M's in it, just so you're aware. We once had a guy here who was very philosophical, and he thought we were named after, the earliest civilization known, at the Sumers. And when he mentioned it to us, we were having some drinks, and we were like, "Oh, we wish we were that intelligent," and actually came up with that ourselves. But we are Appsumer, app and consumer, put it together, and you get Appsumer. So I don't expect to see any more. Can you tell me about Appsumer? So a little bit of background on us. So as I said, I've been in the advertising space since 2002. I joined an agency, a mobile agency called Fetch Media in 2012, where I led their data warehousing solution and reporting. I ended up with people leaving and that heading up 3 teams: the tech team, the engineers, the reporting and analytics team, who were doing the reports for some global brands. And strangely enough, they gave me the creative team to look after as well. Shamel, who's my co-founder, was already at Appsumer for a few years before I joined. He was an account director there, and he led the social media team. So that's how we met. We didn't directly work together. We became friends. It was an agency of about 40, 50 people at that time in London. We were friends and we kept in touch, but that's how we got together. Understanding the why. So at my time at Appsumer, reports were manual. People logging into multiple dashboards, accumulating reports on Excel spreadsheets. They do the best possible to provide relevant statistics. Data may not be available. Formulas you need to get from clients. Sometimes they have their own internal formulas and problems. And genuinely, you were hoping that there were no errors when you had completed this process, which can, I'm talking global brands here where they were 5 to 6 days late in terms of the latency on getting the reports back. And because it was all manual, you're hoping that formula hadn't been somehow amended. And you're providing these reports to a client a week in lieu. So this was a very interesting problem for me, coming from a more digital background online, where things were far more standardized. I didn't realize how bad things were actually in mobile. So that was a picture whilst I was at Fetch. A few years later, so I left Fetch, Shamel left Fetch before me. Obviously, as friends, we stayed in touch. We caught up one time, and he went to another mobile agency called M&C Saatchi. And the reality was the problems hadn't improved. They hadn't changed. The ever maturing kind of market meant even more channels. There were increasing regulations which were coming through. The issue here was more that as there was more and more competition, the advertisers, the brands had to diversify their channel mix far more in order to try and get that edge, if you like, that competitive advantage. And they were delving more and more into the longer tails of networks and even DSPs to try and get that edge, clearly diversifying the range, but also creating more and more problems with the reporting of all of that. Bear in mind, even to this day, some channels are not very good, if at all possibly good, at returning the data and saying how well your spend has happened. So what brands had been left with are multiple advertising channels, multiple targeting options, multiple creative variants, and multiple data sources. This leaves you with, depending on who you are, thousands of different varieties of data. And how the hell do you honestly put all that together to make sense? You can obviously log into Facebook and Google and so on and so forth, maybe TikTok nowadays, but we're not really talking too much about that. We're talking more about the longer tail, smaller channels, which cause all the problems. So now the measurement partners, the MMPs, they provide you with that attribution data, telling you how well things have gone post install, but they're very poor at cost data, and therefore they are getting better. There's no doubt about that, but we're going back a few years where it just wasn't existing there. They were just looking at post-install, how well the thing's performing, which is great, but you don't know the market, the addressable market that you're actually targeting. You have no idea of lookalikes, which they used to use, and it's coming back again in this day and age. So they didn't give you a full picture. They just said post-install, this is what's been happening. So brands resort to, and still to this day, in order to get that full picture, there's still manual reporting going on, and they rely on, if they have the budget, which is another question. Obviously, the larger brands will have the budget to create their internal BI teams. The problem that people face is, okay, you still have to connect to all these data sources, and that in itself is a product as a team to make sure that your integrations with the APIs and so on and so forth are working. But by and large, for the majority of brands, it's still a manual process. So this was, we're going back a few years, but still relevant today. But when we got together, we I realized, because I kind of moved out the mobile, I went into back to online for a little while, programmatic guaranteed. And so when having this conversation, it was quite interesting to see, oh shit, the problems are still there. It was really weird. So how do we solve this problem? So me and Shamal kept in touch quite frequently as friends. And one time he said, okay, let's get together. I've got an idea. So I would love to be cliche, like everybody else does on their stories of how their products came about. We were in a coffee shop and there was a napkin. And I think we all know 99.9% of that. Probably the only one true story about that was the very first one. The rest of them are just kind of trying to hook you, which is very sad. So it was not quite a coffee shop on a napkin, but actually we were in a burger bar. It was a chicken burger bar in Waterloo. And Shamel did bring his laptop to kind of present to me, I have an idea, what do you think? So the overall idea was, we need to bring all the data from mobile marketing into one place, into one source of truth, which is what people do manually, but obviously there's that lead time is very long. And we wanted to make sure that data was accurate and something which anyone using the platform could actually trust as a complete system of record. And also, should add to that, we wanted it in real time or close to real time, which is what the major pain point is for the majority of brands. So what we've come out with, or what we came out with, and we have had various iterations. Obviously, we've been around for 6-7 years, so we have had various iterations of the product. But ultimately, we're focusing now on cost aggregation, a pipeline of the data of how much it's costing, put it together and aggregate that. It's quite a simple process, quite a simple concept, sorry. And then the unification, so unified intelligence is what we call it. So we're going to come on to it, but basically you have various different data sources. How does it all make sense? What does it all refer to? Every platform you use has a different campaign name. You may be using different creatives. So we allow the unification of all that data and the transformation of that data in a way that actually makes sense to mobile marketers. So it's that cost aggregation and that unified intelligence pieces that really make a difference. And our backgrounds in agencies and our understanding of mobile is what makes us different to a lot of tools like Funnel.io and that, which are just basic data aggregators. I mean, maybe I'm doing them a disservice, but they don't have a view, if you like, a specific view on mobile, which we do. So in terms of cost aggregation, we have 100+ data sources which we connect to. We go as granular as the marketers need, and essentially that will be on a creative level. And you're able to send this data, you can visualize it within our platform, which we'll have a demo and you'll see. But at the same time, you can send this data to external sources and so on and so forth via the platform. And from a unified intelligence piece, as I said, we're giving a complete picture because we get the data from all the data sources. If you like, the same ad is appearing on 5 different channels, but the setup on each channel will be different. And therefore, generally speaking, when you're reporting back, and if you've got thousands of ads running, or millions in some cases, then how the hell does this all fit together? We unify that so it makes sense. Standard, we build flexible dashboards for your use cases, and we give a way to slice and dice insights within the platform. So that's a little bit of an overview of how we came together. We came together at Fetch. A few years later on, we decided actually there is a problem still here, and maybe we can genuinely solve a problem. I'm only interested from a personal perspective in solving and working for companies who want to solve real world problems, not for people who make up problems in order to make a fortune. It's of no interest to me whatsoever. Making a fortune is interesting to me, I should say. But in terms of, I like to solve real world problems, if I'm honest. So wanted to talk a little bit about the technology. And I think from an Appsumer perspective, it's important to learn kind of my background. What I'm sure you're all aware of is your managers, if you are managers on this call, your experiences and your exposure and actually what you like is what it comes down to, generally dictates what technologies you will be using, because it's what I'm used to, as an example, or I code in Java, therefore I'm going to do everything in Java type scenario. It does have an impact. Costs also have a slant. And I came from a background of using a company called Rackspace, who are still around. And for several years, I used Rackspace. And Rackspace were brilliant because their strapline, which I believe is still the case, is they were fanatical about support. They were so fanatical that they gave away a lot of services just for free, which seemed absolutely ridiculous. So I had essentially an operations team in Rackspace for free. So anything I wanted doing, I would contact Rackspace, and they were so quick at responding. Installation of software, firewalls, all the networking side was taken care of. Let's look at it that way. Security was taken care of. And it was like saving me literally for some of the jobs I was in £200,000 a year. It was a ridiculous offering. It was brilliant. I loved it. And I don't know if they're on the call now, but this picture was sent to the management team of one of our colleagues who's actually right now in Thailand working from there, and sent this very serene picture of an island where she's staying. And actually, when I looked at it, I was thinking about this presentation and I was thinking about Rackspace, and actually, all joking aside, Rackspace was almost like that for me. It was just a very serene, amazing. My engineers could just crack on with coding and not worry about the networking side of things. And that was the background, and I loved it. Unfortunately, Rackspace suddenly probably realized that actually there was some competition, I should say, in the market, and they were really underpricing their resources, their services, and suddenly their service charges just went through the roof. And it was like, okay, they've realized that they're actually giving away too much for too little. So I had to make obviously I've got to make a decision, where do I go? At the time, so this is pre Appsumer, there wasn't a great deal available on the market. Okay, so AWS was around, and a lot of things were managed. So you rent a rack, essentially. You rent, you rent some space on a rack space, but you rent some space and you buy yourself your server and you rent that out, and then you move forward, and you have to pay the extra charges to look after it. It was all manual. So suddenly, for me as a manager, it's like, okay, I need to hire someone to look after all these things now. And I have been very skeptical since day one, particularly in the early days, of this concept of a full stack developer, simply because it's like, what does full stack mean? Okay, I can do some, just for the sake of argument, I can do some JavaScript and I can do some backend development in whatever language it might be. And it's like, okay, that's fine, but shouldn't, I was doing that since, 1997, and, I was just called an engineer or a developer, depending on where I took the job. So what's so special? It seemed like to me like the only thing special about it was actually putting a few extra digits on the salaries. For me, full stack really meant, can you look after everything? Are you able to build bring up a server? Are you able to install everything that's required on a server? So you're looking at the networking side, for me personally, as well as the engineering side in terms of the product development. So how do you get a team of people who have not looked after the networking side before, left it to me, and I clearly left it to Rackspace in all actuality, to do all these things? And how do you get them to learn? For me, it's not predominantly about the technology that people are using. It's about how do you maintain that technology? How can people get your engineers, your team, get on board and understand how they can do things quickly and easily? And to be fair, at the time, there really was only one solution to that, which was AWS. Now, my thing about AWS is actually, if I go back to Amazon, what I always loved about Amazon, and hopefully I'm not misquoting, but quite a few years ago I read about them, in terms of their strategy. Back in the day, people were working on a 3-year, 5-year strategy for their startups, and investors would be looking for kind of return on investments and so on and so forth within those timeframes. Amazon did it differently. Amazon said, look, we don't want to compete in that space for that kind of investment. What we want to do is have our own strategy and control our own destiny. So they went for a 7-year strategy. And that really interested me. I'm going back 15, 20 years, to be honest. That really interested me, not 20, not quite that long ago, sorry. But that really interested me in terms of 10 years ago, I should say. That really interested me in terms of that's really different. That's really like a novel approach. And obviously, we were all aware of Amazon. So when AWS came around, I was keeping an eye on it. It started off very kind of slowly, if you like, certain offering. However, what I have come from an open sourcey background, shall we say. So I like the ethos of Amazon. I like the fact they seemed very eager from a customer perspective to look after me. Coming from Rackspace, you know, it was nice to see. They're not quite as Rackspace were, I'll be honest with you. They were keen to build trust, which was very important, and they looked after, most importantly for me, it seemed to look after that kind of the essence: computing, storage, networking, and security. So they kind of ticked those boxes. What really interested me and what really kind of made me kind of fall in love with them, if I can say that, is they were a company who built things the right way. Sure, they can tell their stories the way they want to tell their stories, and AWS, whichever way you look at it, has come out of what they've built for their own problems, and that really interested me because it tells me that even though they've had to re-architect things and so on and so forth, they have had real problems. They've struggled themselves with scale, with their clients, getting them onboarded onto their systems. And they've had to cater for that and build systems for that, and they've done it in an amazing way. And ultimately, they show that great people can build great things. One of my friends who was already on AWS at the time said, AWS at that time, they don't release tons and tons of things. And he said, Moin, they'll release 1 or 2 things, but those 1 or 2 things will work. And that's a real pull. You just want things to work. Now, my experience with AWS is that's not actually always the case. I just want it's not always the case. However, their resources are very, 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 very performant. They do, so far I've always found they do what we need them to do. They're cost effective. They have these kind of principles to help everybody who uses them to kind of keep, when you're sharing resources ultimately, to help their resources stay performed. They are very performant in what they do. They have a huge breadth, I should say, of services, 200 plus products. I think we use about 15 of them, to be honest with you. So, I don't know which company, maybe InMobi might be, but which companies would use all of them? The fact of the matter is they've got a huge number of products, and the products have a lot of depth. You can look into EC2 and the amount of kind of things you can do from firewall security groups, from loading on drives and all this kind of stuff. It's there's a huge depth to what they do, which is really impressive. And even back, I'm going back to 2010 when I started using them. There was a lot then as well, and now there's even more. Ultimately,
this is a, you know, no, I shouldn't say ultimately because it all kind of fits together, but they were evolving at the time, and they've come a long way since I started using them. They are an amalgamation of infrastructure as a service, which anyone who's interested in DevOps, which we all should be, is in a very, very important piece of a jigsaw. Platform as a service. They've kind of packaged this together as a software as a service. And ultimately, for my engineers at the time, and it's been consistent throughout for the last 12 years, I guess, I need software as a service, which is genuinely software as a service, which is genuinely easy for people to understand and get up to speed with and maintain. And that's what I found with AWS. The learning curve, because I feel it's their background in terms of open source stuff and their ethos and around that, and their knowledge. I mean, they've got billions to spend, right? You know, they have created an ecosystem which genuinely you can get up to speed very, very quickly. And we can look at it, and a great example we were discussing the other day in the team is not a lot of companies have DBAs anymore. And when I started in IT, obviously quite a few years ago, everyone had a DBA, even for some of the smallest projects. And actually, if you look at it, the RDS, which is the relational database system for Amazon, on Amazon, I should say, uh, it does away with a lot of the things that DBAs do. It's a self, you know, they'll do the backups for you. They'll help you optimize. So it really is a lot of thought goes into what they do to simplify. And I think anyone who, you know, the architects amongst us here, a lot of thought goes into simplification. You know, keeping it simple, KISS is not, it's very nice as a thought process, but actually it takes a lot of effort. And Amazon really have put in that effort. And you know, lastly, their support is, I found it to be second only to how Rackspace was all those years ago. They have a crazy amount of documentation. Anything you want, you can just put in AWS, how do I do X, Y, Z? And there's a crazy amount of documentation. We've got the business level support, and I found them to be amazing. They get back to you immediately when you have technical issues. If there are billing issues and that, you know, for other types of issues, I should say that they sometimes say it's 24 hours and we'll get back to you. But I found that to be amazing. So I think it's fair to say that I put this presentation together over the last week. So there has been a little bit of Googling going on also just to double check certain things. But I wanted to get the headers in there because that's why I chose AWS. And when I put them up against other providers, not AWS, sorry, not Google, not GCP, not Microsoft. One note on Microsoft, I know we are built on Microsoft InMobi, and there could come a time when an Appsumer goes to Microsoft. You know, I don't mind, so I don't like Microsoft. As simple as that. I really appreciate Bill Gates, and I really appreciate what Windows has done to make the world IT literate. You know, if people have read the story about how they chose, you know, how Windows was chosen and all this kind of stuff, you know, it's fortuitous, but I have a great appreciation. But anyone who comes from an open sourcey background, maybe it's unfair. There is a great kind of thing against Microsoft just generally, and I know that Microsoft is trying to get into the open source space and so on and so forth. For me personally, and it is my personal opinion, it just seems so disingenuous if you know the kind of history behind Microsoft and so on. But that's fine. You take what you can get. And the feedback from friends of mine as well who have been in the open source community is that the products given by Azure is actually world class as well. So they're obviously gaining a lot of traction as well. So that was just my opinion. So Microsoft were never in the running for me. GCP weren't in the running in the early days. They did try to kind of win my business, quote unquote. I got a free Chromebook out of them because I took a sales call, which is amazing, where they actually admitted, and this is going back 2017, I think it was, around that time, where I said, this is what we're doing, this is the service we're using, and they admitted to me, this is GCP, that, yeah, AWS have far more services than we do, and they're much better from an infrastructure perspective. So that was quite an interesting take, you know. Clock is ticking. I've still got loads to get through. Sorry. Just to learn a little bit about the things that we use from a road mapping perspective, we use product board. We try and keep Jira clean. I'm going to speed up a little bit. Sorry, I can see the time's ticking. We use Jira, which we all use. Confluence, which we all use. In protecting our infrastructure, we use AWS Shield, which is protecting us from DDoS, and we have been using AWS Inspector for vulnerability testing. Obviously, we're joining the InMobi family, so things are changing. From a monitoring perspective, we use Site 24/7 in order to check servers are all in shape. We use Sentry from an application performance monitoring perspective and error tracking, and obviously CloudWatch for monitoring. We use VPCs, as you would expect, which you have to essentially. From a development perspective, we use Amazon ECR, so we're moving more and more into containerization world. Fran, who's our lead engineer, he's looking after that. We're using Docker. Obviously, we use GitHub from a repository perspective, from versioning control. We use Ansible. We use Terraform from a provisioning and configuration management perspective. We use those two. We've just started using Terraform over the last few months. We've been using Ansible for quite a while. We're also rolling out Circle CI for our continuous integration and continuous deployment. It's the very start of the project for us, and there's lots to do on that side of things. We use a lot of messaging within the system. It's not an event-driven system as such. However, we do use messaging for asynchronous communications. We use Amazon SNS and we use RabbitMQ. Amazon SNS can't guarantee the ordering, which is understandable in a distributed system, the ordering of when the messages get sent. And for Appsumer, it's critically important for certain parts of the system that messages are sent in the correct order. Hence, we use RabbitMQ on that side of things. From a storage perspective, standard S3, EFS, Elastic File System. As I've already mentioned, Amazon RDS. For our databases, we're on MySQL. On that side of things, we use Amazon Redshift for the data warehousing side. And in order to move accounts to different, from a horizontal scaling perspective, we move accounts to different servers. In order for performance, we use Amazon Database Migration Service, which helps us move these accounts. We use the API gateway for what we call push notifications from Supplier, which we'll come on to. And obviously, we use Amazon EC2, which is essentially the base servers and the identity protection from them. So I'm sorry, I'm going to skip through because there's quite a lot. Just to let you know, we use what's called a tech radar. This picture may not mean a lot to you, and I just wanted to skip through it just to let you make you aware. We have our own little center of excellence team at Appsumer. We talk about what emerging technologies are, or what we should be using, not so emerging technologies, but technologies that we should be using, and we scale it out based upon should we be adopting them, should we assess them, are they on hold? So we keep an eye on this every quarter just to see the technological choices that we're making. And that helps us, and it helps us not forget, because I think sometimes when you're really busy, you forget, oh, we were supposed to, how did Moin get on reviewing, that Java stuff, or Kafka, how did that go? And you kind of forget because there's so many other things going on. So we kind of we hold ourselves to account before anybody else does. So this helps us really increase the breadth of the technologies that we would like to use. And we do proper tech discoveries and we take our time to make sure that we're doing the right things. So I just wanted to kind of touch on that. Now, we can talk a little bit about the data and how it moves through the system. So here we have a data flow diagram, and you might have to bear with me with this. I'm going to start on the top left and talk you through how it all works. Essentially, there are two ways, in essence, where we get our data. We either have the data pushed to us. So Appsumer is a good example where events are pushed to us in real time or close to real time, or we pull the data. And I'll come on to the different types of data sources in a moment. Ultimately, both types of data collection go through the same workflow, but we need to get them kind of parried together, if that makes sense. So top left, where it says push data sources, that gets pushed to us from Appsumer. We use serverless, so we use Appsumer API gateway, and then we use Lambda functions, so serverless architecture, in order to filter out sensitive data. And we put that into an S3 bucket in the temp data store. And then we have on 0.1 preprocessor, which runs every few minutes. It gets the data that's there and it processes that data. And it does a transformation basically based upon the requirements of the client. So advertiser date, media partners, report types. We just try and put it together into a CSV file in the right format so it's ready to be validated. That then goes into another data store, so it's ready to go basically into the platform. So that's how push data gets into the system, push to our system, we clean it up, we say here it is, it's ready to go to be collected by Appsumer proper, shall we say. The second way is the pulling of data sources. So as we'll come on to in the demo, you can set up your integrations and you can put times against how often you want it to run, every hour, every day. Majority of people actually run it every day because that's what they want to see, what happened yesterday. No one's sitting there, apart from CEOs who's probably spent a lot of money clicking, refreshing their windows to see if there's anything changed. So we have an initialization service. So on the left-hand side, 1.0, which gets run to say, do I need to go and fetch any data? If you do, the fetcher will go and pull the data. Now, once it's got the data, the system's running the same way. So it will actually fetch the data from external APIs, and depending on how the configuration is, it will pull the data which has been pushed to us from the push processed data store. I'm hoping you're following this. So I appreciate it's a little bit complicated. However, once it's got the data from wherever it's going to get the data, it goes through our TL side of things, so the transformation side of things. So we make sure that so on the right hand side, 1.2 CSV conversion, we make sure everything is in the right format. Once it is, it gets pushed to the filter. So when you are pulling data from various data sources, you can filter the actual data, the columns that you want. Sometimes this can be done on the API end, on the partner's end, where the filtration can happen when you're retrieving data. A lot of times they don't have that facility, they just send you everything, and it's got to happen at our end. So we'll retrieve all the data, then we'll set the columns, and then we'll say, actually, we don't want these columns. So we filter through the data that we actually want. And also from a row perspective, which we'll come on to. We then map that data to Appsumer columns, and we aggregate that data. So even though we bring in millions of rows on a daily basis, we don't display all those rows for the clients. We actually aggregate that data. So depending on a composite key, your data, you might have 100 rows, will just be one row for that day, essentially, and depending on your key, but definitely for the day at the very least. And then we run through validation, making sure actually all the columns and everything is of the correct types. Once that whole process is done, we push that to the reporting data store. So this is our ETL. It's unique from some aspects, as every ETL should be. It's not a standard process that we take, but obviously the ETL itself is pretty standard. Extract the data, transform the data, and then load the data. However, this is more specific towards the nuances of mobile. I'm hoping that has made some sense. We can always come back to that if we have time later, if you want. So let's talk about integrations. Integrations are part of the system which I'll show you, which are the fetching, processing, ingestion, and removal of third-party data within Appsumer. And so these push and pull, if you go back to the last diagram, types of data coming in, they are of the push type from Appsumer predominantly. They are the pull type where we go out and we fetch data from APIs. There's data locker, which again is an Appsumer product, which clients actually get the data themselves, and we retrieve that from clients, so we can customize integrations for clients. We have email integrations, so some partners, some clients will send us data via emails, and we have a system. The system will go out and retrieve emails and fetch the data, so on and so forth. And then we have like your FTPs in the old days type scenario of S3 buckets and so on and so forth. So we have a few different integration types, and we're always building integrations. We have a team who look after integrations. So overall, we have 93 supplier integration types, which are APIs, going to general reporting APIs, marketing APIs, and graph APIs for depending on what is required. So these are the types of integrations. Every day we run, say, 1,600 odd supply integrations. So that's every day, predominantly overnight. We have 6 mobile measurement partners who we integrate with, and the types of integrations are pull, so we fetch the data, push, as I said, in terms, so pull would be adjust as a good example. For push, Appsumer, push, and pull as well for Appsumer. Data locker, which is an Appsumer specific product, and cohorted data. And then we have almost 3,000 odd, so these are average figures we're giving of integration, MMP integrations which run every day. And right now we have 5 client integrations, so 5 of our clients who supply their own data. Again, if we go back to the beginning, merging your data with all the data together. So LTV, which is lifetime value, clients try and see if I spend X, how much Y am I going to get at the end of it? What's the lifetime value of Moin? How much is he going to spend? In my case, it's probably 0, but in somebody else's case, hopefully it's a lot. So they need to know this and they need to put it together. How well is my advertising performing? Am I targeting the right people? So on and so forth. Again, complexity. They load this into Appsumer. It's more of a bespoke, customized solution for them. So we can actually help marry up that data. And we run roughly 30 of these every day. Now, what that means at an overarching scale is we run about 144, we retrieve 144 million odd rows each day on Appsumer. So we're not talking about billions, but because of our processes of filtration, of transformation, of aggregation, we insert roughly 17 million odd rows every day into the system. Now, bear in mind, we are a startup, and obviously we're hoping to scale. We have approximately 30 clients on Appsumer. So it's a significant amount of data from a reporting perspective for these 30 clients. If you can imagine, if you average that out, doing all of this on a spreadsheet, if you're one of these clients and you've got 10 million rows or whatever it might be coming through, you can't do it. You know, there's an incredible amount of problems. So that's integrations and the pulling and processing of data. Tagging, so we're going to talk a little bit about tagging. Hopefully I'm not going too fast, but running out of time. So what is tagging? Tagging, there's an account level setup where per client we set cohort periods. So these are from days since install, basically. So you're looking at certain cohort windows to see how well your spend is going and how much people are worth to you, so on and so forth. So you'll set that up. It'll be different for different account teams. And when people change within teams of the same brand, they'll change things because they're used to doing things a certain way. So you'll set up your cohort periods. You'll set up also your integrations, your cost, your attribution, and any custom integrations that you have. That's all done as part of the Appsumer onboarding process by the implementation team, which we have. A tag itself is a unique field. It's a field in and of itself, but it's a system of record, and that in itself has to be unique. So it's a composite, and it's defined by the accounts, how they set things up. So for example, Facebook just has an ad ID, so that might just be your tag. I'm going off the ad ID. However, you might say, actually, that ad ID in Facebook, actually on Google, it's a campaign ID and a country code. In Apple search ads, it's an ad group ID. So you can define the granularity given on a given supplier of how you want your data to be aggregated. That composite key can be defined by the account. And any data fetching and aggregation is essentially going to use that tagging, that composite key to aggregate the data. So as we've just shown, we map third-party fields into Appsumer fields, which helps for consistency. And then we do the data validation. Now, if your composite does not exist on the platform, we will create that tag for you. So you now have that as a record. If that composite comes again, we will obviously update that tag based upon the data. So we create tags so people don't have to go in and actually create like you would on Facebook and all the other partners. We'll do that for you to actually help streamline the process. So that's quite a nice, unique way of doing things. This then gets pushed essentially into a few processes are carried out with the cohort data in particular. We have a concept called calculated spend, where we have a formula. So you might not have data, some cost, maybe an API is down or data is not available. So this is one of the things which agencies struggle with. We actually have a formula and a kind of algorithm which works out, this is how much we think it would have cost you. So it's not forecasting per se, but it helps you complete your picture. So for the last 3 days, you might not have any spend data for, let's just say Facebook, just for the sake of argument. But actually, based upon the last 7 days, this is how much we reckon you are going to end up, it's going to cost you. So we're able to fulfill the picture with albeit with an element of forecasting, which really helps marketing teams. So that's a tag. It's the lowest granularity level of reporting that we do in the system, and it's totally up to the accounts, the clients, the brands to decide that level of granularity. And based upon that, we do the aggregation and all the kind of the transformations. So cool. So learn why you should never give a live demo. All right. So here we go, guys. I'm going to give a demo. I might have to run through it a little bit quicker, but let's try and take a little bit of time if I can. Apologies if we overrun. Is that okay? If we overrun by 5-10 minutes, I don't know. Dishita, is that okay?
Yes, Moin, no worries. We can do that.
Okay, cool. I won't take any offense if anyone needs to drop off. I apologize. So, so this is Appsumer. I'm gonna work backwards because we're gonna look at how the data gets into Appsumer first, and then we'll work our way up to the reporting and the dashboard side of things. I've picked. Let's go right here. So, our implementation team, who do a great job. Well, to do a great job is an understatement. Do an amazing job of onboarding accounts. You'll see throughout this demo there are certain pieces which are quite complicated actually for your average mobile marketer to do. So we have an onboarding service. We have an implementation team headed up by Jenny now, and as before her, and Will and Francis and everybody else, if I forgot any names, forgive me. But they set up these integrations for our accounts. So we work with clients directly saying, who are you connected with? What do your reports look like? What do you want to get out of your reports? So they will set up an integration. And this is what the integration screen looks like. There's not, some parts are quite standard, so you need to put your credentials into the system for the integration to work. Different integrations require different fields. Obviously, there's an app ID here. The report types, so each integration for each partner, there will be different types of reports available. So we have that set up and you would select whichever report is the most relevant. More interesting, I guess, is how we set up the mappings and side of things. So you would, again, we go through aggregation of data. What type of partner is this? What's your method? Do we override? Do we accumulate? I don't think we use accumulate anymore, but you overwrite the data that's already there. So if you're rerunning integrations, you don't start double counting, basically preventing that kind of side of things. So what's probably the most interesting part and what makes this quite relatively unique is these are incoming fields from Google. And what we do is we map them against Appsumer fields such that we have consistency within our data. We're normalizing the data, labeling, shall we say. And what you're doing is, because you're building a composite of what you want, you can actually add, like regular expressions here. I won't bother because I'll embarrass myself. But you can actually add regular expressions here and so on and so forth. So you might, for example, I don't know. Don't correct me if I'm wrong. I haven't written a regular expression for a while. But you're looking for, say, city in the name of a column coming through. So you might you close off. But anyway, I'll delete that. You can build regular expressions for columns and extract the data that's relevant for your composite and for every other field. So you can actually group fields together, so on and so forth. So it becomes quite a powerful way to actually extract the data and transform that data then moving forward and push that into relevant fields. And that helps with the unification side of things. So you can also put calculations in there. So the column name might start with a number, for example, or so on and so forth. So it adds quite a lot of, there's quite a fair amount in there. I should say, sorry, I just lost myself. Okay, cool. So then you cut through all that. You basically can run a test. I'm sure this test will fail because it's a live demo. There you go. No refresh token, please provide. So you can run a test to make sure that integration has worked. And you can then schedule your integrations. So these are all paused, but you can run it every day, every hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. I think when clients first come on board, they want to run it every minute, which we don't provide, but they soon realize actually they don't need it every day is what they essentially go for. So you can set up all your integrations in that manner. Every integration is different for every supplier. You can see here a list of suppliers that we can
Hi,
work with.
Moin.
Hi.
This is Gaurav. One question about the integrations. So, do these transformations work when you are importing the data, or are they applied at runtime when you are retrieving and sort of reverse map from the desired value to the expression at runtime when you're querying it? So, when do you do these transformations?
It's done as the data comes into the system. So in terms of filtration, we do that as ideally at the source, but sometimes but all transformations are done before they enter into the database.
So if you do, okay, so how does it, how do you manage any sort of new transformations that you're introducing for historical data? Because that would be a significant volume of data to go back and fix.
Yeah, so we do have this problem, particularly when in a team for a brand, the team changes and some new account person comes in and says, I want to do it this way. We can actually replay the schedule, and we do that in batches over the data. So we will replay and reprocess all the data. And it does take time. It can take, but what we do is we work with the clients and say, okay, if you have lifetime data, so if you've been with us for 6 years, some accounts have been with us that long, we'll say, you only look at the last 3 months data. We'll work with product on that, and we'll just backtrack the last 3 months, and then we'll just do it in the background, older data. So we'll work with the accounts on that. It doesn't happen as frequently as you might suggest. The reason is the implementation team do genuinely, I'm not just saying this, but they do an amazing job at working with the clients and understanding what they need. And once it's set up, even new people who come in, when they realize how things have been set up and the reasoning, I can't remember, if I'm honest with you, this year when we've had to replay that data. The problem that you have with potentially, obviously you're limited by the APIs in what they can do. So that's one limitation. And you're limited in the speed of the platform, particularly when you set in stone, this is how I want things to be. To do that processing in real time, it's almost like a kind of a waste of time, if you know what I mean. If it was changing on a daily basis, then definitely we would have to rethink that.
Sure. There are few use cases that I'm working on a part of Project Symphony.
Yeah.
There are similar scenarios there. I would connect with you offline just to pick your brain on this.
Absolutely, yeah. And also, I mean, we've looked at storing files, and there's another project we're going to with Sunil, who's joined us. We'll be looking at just storing files and actually doing that on the fly, probably via Spark or something like that along those lines, to actually do that on the fly rather than do it as we are doing at the moment. But that is a nice to have for us at the moment, if I'm honest. It's not, because right now it works as it needs to work. A lot of times it's educational for clients as well, to be honest with you, for their understanding. But yeah, we can connect with that, absolutely. It would be a pleasure to. Cool. All right, so that's the integrations. Metric, I'm going to go for the links. Metrics is not too good. So tags is the main one now. So what, again, actually, Gaurav, just to go back to your point, what happens here is this is the data that's come in. So what the implementation team will do is they will set up rules that will run. Now let's have a look at, let's edit one. We won't edit my one because my one, which I tried yesterday, didn't really work. So you can make rules for certain fields to look certain ways or to contain certain types of data. So a lot of accounts, a lot of brands obviously coming from an Excel background use VLOOKUP on Excel, and we have that functionality within the system. So actually we have VLOOKUP tables that they can use, which they will, they'll set up themselves via the implementation team. You can add regular expressions to say, this is what I want it to do, essentially. And those rules get run over the data. So the first time the data comes into the system, the rules will run over the data, Gaurav. So that will give you that transformation that you're talking about. So it's done as the data is being transformed. If you suddenly make a change, so for example, a new account director started, then you could create a new rule to change the data and run them. I can click run, it probably won't work. So you can actually change the data yourself in this manner. So there's another option there, Gaurav, from that perspective. And then you can see the data here. And then within this grid itself, you can actually change data as you want to. So this is all about normalizing the data in your view of the account. And this is the most granular view you get of your tags but this is editable, obviously.
This is pretty neat. Yeah, I'd love to know more about how this works under the hood. I'll connect with you.
Cool.
Rishabh, I see you are also on the call, so I think we can connect with Moin to get more details.
Brilliant. Yeah, absolutely. It'd be more than a pleasure. There's obviously lots of cool things you can do. For time constraints, we'll just try and keep it simple. You can export and so on and so forth, and you can look at parent values. So we have inheritance going on here as well in terms of the tags themselves. But that's cool. Then we come on to reports and dashboards. So this is the simple bit, shall we just say? So it's always good to show last. This is where the data kind of realizes itself. So and I guess this is the bit that the aggregation, the fetching of data, the integrations, the tagging is what the product team are working on, the commercial team are working on with InMobi now to kind of get the data into the system. And there's a few things which some of the implementation, Krishna, I believe, is helping out on that side to get the data into Appsumer and see how the transformations will work. From a reporting perspective, we have dashboards and reports themselves. So here you just have multiple tiles, which again, you'll set up yourself as an account. Again, the implementation team will set that up for you as part of the onboarding and train you as well, obviously, on how to do it. Different types of charts that you have. This is kind of somewhat standard, but you can apply filtering within the charts, filters within filters, if you like, and how you want to display things. So you see you've got kind of like a bar chart here, just the numbers, pie charts, line graphs, and the tables themselves. So you can add, I think there is a limit of about 100. But if you use fees, so if you're using an agency, for example, an agency charge fees, you can add your fees on top of that. So we'll have that within the system. Right now, we have 3 currencies, USD, GBP, and euros. We are working, Linda is working on exchange rate, much more exchange rates, obviously with InMobi and with the Asia countries coming in. We're adding more to that. You can add filters at the global level if you like. Date ranges or media partners is quite a common one that you want to see. And then obviously you can select date ranges. You can compare previous periods. What we'll do is we'll go into reports. You can save your reports. This is kind of all standard, I guess. I'll kind of rush through this stuff, but you can save multiple reports. This is actually quite useful, surprisingly to me. I think I remember having an argument like, do we need all this stuff? But actually, the use case I've been proven wrong, i.e., in a lot of companies, obviously different departments need different views of what makes sense to them, and that's where this is becoming quite useful for those different use cases. So it's good to be proven wrong. It's not. And then we have the overall reports. Again, similar. You can save your reports. Currency changes. You can add your filters at the high level. We can compare I can't compare. Okay, so I'm not using dynamic dimensions. It says different. Okay, fine. You can compare how well things are doing to different date ranges. I'm not using the right report. Do I have another one? Let's see if I've got one, which actually no, I won't have it. So essentially, that's much more of an Excel type view. One really interesting point here. So you can see the table. So the comparison will show you, obviously within columns, you can actually filter through certain things, and what is that? I'm not clicking the right one. But you can filter each column. And the comparison, if I had the right data set showing you, you would see you'd give a date range of what you want to compare to. So you can compare this quarter to last quarter. What's the spend? How many installs did we get? So on and so forth. So those things are really interesting. You can customize this table. So you have all the dimensions and metrics which are possibly available here. You scroll through them. There is a limit, I think 80 columns to show, if I'm not mistaken. You've got your cohorted periods as well available to you. You can change your order, the standard stuff. You can put your formulas in here. So you can say, I want to spend only anything over 100. I assume this is whatever pounds or dollars, whichever the report is in. So it's quite nice. It's quite a powerful way. The difficult thing, CEOs like to make my life difficult, is that we allow the transformation of data across our data warehouse or data lake or data quagmire, which is what it's all becoming in this day and age. So you can actually go back to lifetime and actually update all the data within the system. Just going back to what we talked about, Gaurav. So we allow quite a lot of, it's quite a powerful tool in that respect. What we do is we have something called data status. So there's nothing going on here at the moment, obviously it's a demo. What this does is it tells you per supplier what's the status, saying the obvious, what's the status of your data? Is it currently being fetched? Is it currently being processed? Is it complete? The benefit of this is sometimes obviously we don't have any control over third parties and APIs will fail, or the APIs are delayed or whatever it might be. So you might have your Facebook data in, but you might not have your Google data in. So you'll know from this, actually, I can run my reports on Facebook data because it's all completed, but I can't run my reports on Google because it's still waiting to happen. So this gives the client an ability to know this, exactly what position is of their data. So that's a very quick kind of tour of the product itself. I've done an injustice to the guys in simplifying it so much, but I think with the time it is, I think unfortunately we'll have to. So, and definitely we can, if anyone wants, we can definitely deep dive back into that outside of this meeting. So let's have a quick look at how we've been doing. The customer success team gone out to client accounts and kind of got this scale of 0 to 5 or dash to 5 for some reason, 5 being the most difficult, dash being as easy as possible. So reporting difficulty before and after Appsumer. So if we look at this, how difficult is it for your team to gather their spend data? It was a 5 before Appsumer, right? This is across about 5 or 6 brands that kind of agreed to do this. So very difficult, and now with Appsumer it's a 1, so it's obviously a lot easier. So we've kind of going all the way back, as a good presentation should do. I'm not saying this is a good presentation, but to the beginning, why did we start Appsumer? It's brilliant to see that we've been able to tick that box. How difficult is it for your team to get cohorted attribution data in specific windows? It says 5, and I would hesitate to say it's probably about 95 if it was available. Very difficult without a system like ours, and it's nice and easy now. How difficult is it for your team to get spend and attribution data unification? I would say impossible, 5 before Appsumer pretty much, and now very straightforward. And how difficult was it obtained to gain granular reports? Again, really hard before. And this is genuine data, even though it reads like it's not, to be honest with you. How difficult is it for your team to get creative insights? We aren't great at creative. So 3 is at least it's an improvement from a 5. And it's one of the projects of the product team looking at Clement, Becky, and Frank. They'll be looking at that. So in terms of, okay, how much time are we spending? This is a difficult one to measure. So this was quite surprising for me that we got these. How much time is spent on a weekly basis on reporting? Before Appsumer, 15 hours. After Appsumer, 1 hour. Amazing. This is even more amazing. How many hours of monthly support does the BI team require? Before Appsumer, 80 hours. I mean, that's crazy. That's 3 people, right? And after Appsumer, 5 hours, which is 1/10 of a person. So going back to why we started it, going back to the ethos of the we want to solve real world problems, we're genuinely on that track, and we genuinely know there's improvements to be made, which the product team again are working hard on. Obviously my engineers are working really hard on, but it's so brilliant to see the difference that we're making. And there's a lot of work that goes in right across the company in terms of the implementation team, the CS team, and so on and so forth. So where does Appsumer fit in with InMobi? Well, where InMobi predominantly has that supply side view, except for DSP and IAP, we have a predominant demand side view of the ecosystem, of mobile ecosystem. So we genuinely feel that we can come in there and support InMobi in that side of things and improve that marketing stack, really. We are working on, obviously Abe has already mentioned in terms of us being the reporting interface, there are a lot of conversations going on. So I don't have anything specific as of today, unfortunately, because there are so many things going on. We know the route we're taking, but I think there'll be a lot more things that will come on that journey. And when we have more, we'll definitely share it. Right now, it's onboarding of InMobi clients into Appsumer. It's becoming that reporting piece for InMobi. So a little bit about our roadmap. We're improving our core offering. We are ahead of competitors, but competitors are investing heavily, and we're talking about MMPs predominantly, but there are new players in the market. So we continually improve our core offerings. We want to make, as I've shown you, you can put regular expressions, run rules, so on and so forth. These things are a little bit beyond not something much more beyond the scope of your average person who doesn't know much about tech. So we're trying to improve, and we will be improving our self-service capabilities. There is a freemium in terms of cross-selling for InMobi and centralized reporting, which we've kind of just touched on. So we'll try and get clients on a freemium model and get them hooked that way. We always work on differentiating features. I don't know what that differentiating feature is for this year. There's been a lot going on with the takeover and so on and so forth. Again, I'll definitely update everyone when we have that, what feature we'll be working on for sure. We're, from a technological perspective, from the engineers, we've been making Appsumer scalable. We've had limited resources. We're a startup and we have had that. We're taking an approach now, and we've started the process of, for those of you familiar with domain-driven design, there's a concept of the mound of mud, which is very harsh, but it's a monolithic application which you need to break up. And we've been doing that for a while now, and it's been a slow progress. But with the resources that we're hiring, there's quite a few people coming into Appsumer now. We're hoping to accelerate that breakup, and we're using a domain-driven approach, which I'd love to share with this group in a few months' time, how it's going and what we're doing, to actually making Appsumer more scalable from an automated fashion. We can scale to the hundreds of accounts without any problems from an infrastructure perspective. Is that my alarm? I've pretty much finished, so that's good news. However, that would give us a few sleepless nights because a lot of it will be manual stuff involved.